Hello, and welcome to Sunset Zen and Sleepy Stories. Please relax, listen, and enjoy.
The Long Green Way, Story 2, the Toccoa River. Day 2, heading north from Long Branch campsite. He woke to rain. Not the dramatic rain of storms, no thunder, no wind driving it sideways against the tent, but the quiet rain, the persistent kind, the rain that has settled in and made itself at home and has no particular plans to leave. It tapped against the tent fly in a low, continuous murmur, the sound of it filling the small space inside the tent, the way music fills a room, until there was no thought that did not have rain underneath it. Thomas lay still and listened. It was earlier than he'd woken the morning before. The clock on his phone said 5:15, and the world outside the tent was completely dark. He could hear nothing from Owen and Eli's tent, which was 6 feet away and which, in the rain, might as well have been across a field. He lay on his back with his hands folded on his chest and listened to the rain and did the thing he had been doing since he was a child. The thing he had never had a name for, but which he thought of, privately, as a counting, a quiet inventory of the self, taken in the dark before the day began. Where are you? How are you? What do you need? Where he was, in a tent on a mountain in Georgia, 8 miles north of Springer Mountain on the Appalachian Trail. How he was, his hips were sore from the ground. His left knee had a faint and warning tenderness that he was choosing not to think about too carefully, and his shoulders felt the previous day's pack weight in a deep, generalized way. Not pain exactly, but an awareness, a remembering. Otherwise he was all right. Otherwise he was, in some way he was still finding words for, better than all right. What he needed? Coffee. And then the day. He reached for his phone and checked the weather, which Eli had shown him how to do with the hiking app, a map of the trail ahead, overlaid with precipitation. Eli had said 2 days ago that Thursday would bring rain, and there it was on the screen, confirming it, a green smear covering their current location, extending north through the morning and well into the afternoon, thinning eventually toward evening. It would be a wet day. He had known wet days before, and well behind works on the edge. He thought of what his own father had said, once, standing at the window of the house Thomas had grown up in, watching rain fall on the backyard garden. The rain doesn't care if you're ready for it. Best to just get wet. His father had been a man of compressed wisdom, delivered without ceremony. He had been dead 11 years. Thomas still heard him sometimes, in moments like this, pre-dawn, quiet, a weather situation that required either acceptance or complaint. And complaint had never seemed worth much. Best to just get wet. He smiled in the dark. He sat up. He dressed inside the tent, which required the particular contortions of a man in a small nylon space. The folding, the careful maneuvering, the sitting rather than standing, and then unzipped the fly and stepped out into the morning. The rain was gentle on his face, cool, not cold. The air smelled of it, of wet earth and wet bark and something green and alive that came up from the forest floor when the rain touched it, a smell so clean it almost hurt, the way very clean things sometimes do, the way they make you aware of how accustomed you've grown to less. He stood outside the tent for a moment, simply standing in the rain, his face tilted up slightly, his eyes closed. He heard, from the other tent, the sound of Owen's voice, a low, muffled complaint, and then Eli saying something too quiet to make out, and then silence again, and then the zipper of their tent opening, and Eli emerged. already wearing his rain jacket, his pack cover on, efficient and prepared, as if he had known the rain was coming and had made his peace with it in advance, which, Thomas reflected, was probably true, because Eli had checked the weather 2 days ago and had known it was coming Thursday, and here it was, Thursday, right on schedule. "Morning," Eli said quietly. "Morning." Eli looked up at the sky, or rather at the dark above them, where the sky presumably was, somewhere beyond the trees and the rain and the rest of the night. "It'll ease up this afternoon," he said. "I know. I checked." Eli nodded. He was already setting up the small stove under the lip of the rain tarp they'd strung between 2 trees the night before, another of Eli's preparations. The tarp set up before dinner, before it was needed, because Eli thought ahead. Thomas watched him work, the small efficiency of it, the way he moved without wasted motion, the little blue flame appearing under the pot with a soft pop. From inside the tent, Owen groaned. "You'll be fine," Eli said, without looking up. "He's not a morning person," Thomas said. "He's not a rain person. He loves weather. He talks about weather constantly. He loves weather as a subject," Eli said, with the precision of someone who had spent a lifetime making this distinction. "He does not love being inside it." Owen emerged 15 minutes later, wearing his rain jacket and an expression of dignified suffering. "Throughout my life, I have learned that the most profound wisdom often comes from the quietest moments." He sat on a log under the tarp and accepted the coffee Eli handed him, and wrapped both hands around the cup and stared at the middle distance while the rain continued its quiet work on the canopy above them, finding the leaves, running off the edges, dripping in a secondary, uneven curtain from the tarp. He drank his coffee. Slowly he returned to himself. This was something Thomas had always loved about Owen, the returning. He was not a person who woke easily or moved easily from sleep to waking, but once he arrived, once the coffee had done its work and the world had come back into focus, he was entirely there, fully present, no residue of sleep left in him. He went from absent to present the way a light goes on, and when it went on you had his full attention, his full mind, which was a substantial thing. "It's raining," Owen said, when he had finished the first cup. "It is," Thomas agreed. Eli said it'll ease up. This afternoon, Owen looked out at the rain filtering through the trees, the way it made the forest gauzy and soft, the distances uncertain. The trees farther out were dim shapes, barely darker than the air around them. It was the kind of morning that made the world seem freshly made, or freshly unmade, depending on your disposition. "I read last night," Owen said, pouring a second cup, "that the stretch today takes us down to the Toccoa River. There's a suspension footbridge, cable suspension, built in 1977, 270 feet long, about 110 feet above the river." He paused. "In rain, the cables get slick." "We'll be fine," Eli said. "I didn't say we wouldn't. I'm just noting the cables." "Noted," said Thomas. Owen drank his second cup with more speed and purpose than the first. The information seemed to have energized him, the approach of a specific thing to see and name and stand upon. Thomas had watched this happen with Owen his whole life, give him a fact attached to a destination, and the destination became irresistible. When Owen was 9, Thomas had mentioned, idly, that the Natural History Museum in Washington had the skeleton of a blue whale suspended from the ceiling, and Owen had talked about nothing else for 3 weeks, until they went. The whale had been magnificent. Owen had stood beneath it for a long time, looking up, not saying anything, which for Owen was the highest form of tribute. They broke camp in the rain, moving efficiently, the three of them developing by necessity the wordless coordination of people working toward a shared purpose in conditions that discourage conversation. Thomas shook out his tent and found that breaking it down in rain was a different proposition than setting it up in dry weather, the wet fabric heavier, colder, the poles slippery. But he managed and stuffed it into its sack with the particular satisfaction of having done a slightly difficult thing without complaint. His pack was heavier with wet. Not much rain gear was on, packs were covered, but the air itself seemed heavier today, more substantial, and the weight of the 31 pounds settled differently on his hips and shoulders, as if it too had woken up stiff. By 7, they were on the trail, moving north. The forest in the rain is a different forest than the forest in the sun. Thomas had known this in the abstract, had experienced it on day hikes, but the sustained walking through it, mile after mile of it, made him understand it more fully. The colors were different, the green deeper and more saturated, almost luminous, the kind of green that seems to produce its own light, rather than reflecting it. The bark of the trees was dark with water, nearly black in places, so that the white blazes stood out more sharply than they had the day before, bright rectangles on dark surfaces, unmistakable, leading north. The undergrowth gleamed. Every leaf held its own small supply of water, and when you brushed against it in passing, it gave that water to you freely, without resentment. Thomas was wet within the first mile, despite the rain jacket. The jacket kept the direct rain off, but the trail here was narrow and pressed close by vegetation on both sides, and contact was unavoidable. A shoulder against a rhododendron branch, a shin against the wet ferns that overhung the trail's edges, but with private legs and wristband succulated pressure. Thomas was so Penelope that he was taken fairly close to him. A sleeve catching on a low branch and coming away dark with water. He had been told to expect this. He had read about it in the 3 trail guides he'd bought in the months of preparation. Knowing had not made him fully ready for the sensation, which was not unpleasant. Exactly. More strange than unpleasant. More like being gradually absorbed into the landscape, taken in, until the distinction between himself and the wet forest was a matter of degree rather than kind. He found, walking, that he did not mind it. This surprised him. He had expected to mind. He was a person who liked comfort and had arranged his adult life, within the modest means of a teacher's salary, toward the direction of comfort. A good bed, a warm house, a functioning furnace that he had replaced 2 years ago at considerable expense and without regret. He was not, he would have said, someone who was indifferent to rain. But this rain, on this trail, moving north with his sons ahead of him, Owen at the front as usual, Eli in the middle, Thomas behind, watching their shapes move through the gauzy morning, this rain felt like something else. Like weather he had earned the right to be inside of. Like belonging. The trail dropped gradually through the morning, losing elevation as it moved north toward the river valley. The descent gentle enough that Thomas's knee did not complain, but present enough that he felt it. The slight forward lean, the poles taking some of the weight, his boots finding purchase on the wet earth and rock. The trail surface here was good, well maintained, the drainage channels clear, so that the rain sheeted off rather than pooling. But roots were crossing the trail at intervals, dark with water and treacherous. And Thomas watched his footing with an attention he had not needed to pay the day before. Watching his footing, he noticed more. This was a thing the trail did. He was beginning to understand. The demand for attention, redirected attention, focused it, funneled it into the immediate and the close. When you were watching the next 3 feet of trail for roots and wet rock, you were also, inevitably, seeing the mushrooms at the base of that oak, orange shell fungi, bright as safety cones, layered in overlapping shelves up the bark, and the tiny stream that had appeared at the trail's edge, building itself out of the rain's runoff, following the path downhill as they were, a miniature parallel journey, 2 or 3 inches wide and perfectly clear. Owen had stopped ahead to photograph something. He was standing very still at the side of the trail, his phone held at ground level, his posture entirely absorbed. Thomas came up beside him and looked. A salamander, black, with yellow spots, vivid as paint, sitting on a dark, wet rock at the trail's edge, with the absolute stillness that small animals achieve when they have decided that stillness is their best option. It was perhaps 4 inches long. Its skin gleamed with rain or with its own moisture. Salamanders did not entirely distinguish between their inside and outside, Thomas had once read, their skin being permeable, part of their breathing. Spotted salamander, Owen said, very quietly. Ambystoma maculatum. They come out in the rain. They live underground most of the year. This is what they look like when they come up. The salamander did not move. It regarded the enormous creatures looming over it with an expression of complete composure. If a salamander could be said to have an expression, which perhaps it could. How long do they live? Thomas asked, equally quietly, though he did not know why he was being quiet. The salamander was not going to hear them. 20 years. Sometimes more. Owen straightened slowly. That one might have been alive in 2004. Might have seen the trail look exactly like this. Thomas looked at the salamander. He thought about 2004. Owen had been 2 years old. Eli had just been born, home from the hospital less than a week. 20 years is a long time to live in the ground, he said. It has opinions about rain, apparently. They left it there, on its rock, going nowhere in particular, rich in its own form of patience. Eli had waited for them at a flat spot where the trail briefly widened, standing in the rain looking at his phone, not with the distraction of someone killing time, but with the purposeful look he always wore when checking the navigation. He had the app that showed their position as a blue dot on the trail map, and he checked it every mile or so, less from necessity, the blazes were sufficient, than from what Thomas thought of as navigational conscience. A need to know not just that he was on the right path, but exactly where on the right path he was. About 2 miles to the bridge, Eli said, when they caught up. How's the trail? More descent. Then flat along the river for a stretch. Should be good. They walked on. The rain had eased slightly, not stopped, not even close to stopping, but reduced to something softer, more dispersed, more like a mist that had not quite made up its mind. The trees here were older and taller, and the canopy, even without its leaves fully filtering the weather, absorbed some of what fell, so that what reached the trail floor was gentle, diffused, arriving as a generalized dampness rather than individual drops. Thomas fell into the rhythm of walking. He had found it the afternoon before, that particular gear his body found after an hour or two of movement, where the effort stopped feeling like effort. and started feeling like motion, like the natural state of things, like the body doing what it was built to do. He found it again this morning, sooner than the day before, which he supposed was adaptation beginning. He thought about what Eli had said. By day 3 or 4, you won't notice the weight. He was beginning to believe it. He thought about his students. He did this sometimes on walks at home. Thought about the ones who were struggling, the ones he was worried about, the ones who had something to say and hadn't yet found the confidence to say it. There was a boy in his 3rd period class, a junior named Marcus, who had spent most of the semester sitting in the back row, producing work that was adequate and contained. Thomas always felt a quality of deliberate concealment, as if Marcus were writing to the minimum rather than to the edge of what he could do. Thomas had tried several approaches, different prompts, one-on-one time, a conversation after class that had been friendly and unproductive. He had not yet found the thing that opened the door. He thought, I will find it in September. He will still be there in September, and I will find it. This was one of the things Thomas loved about teaching, the ongoing nature of it, the fact that a student who had not yet arrived could arrive next week, or next month, or next year. And the effort you made toward them was never wasted, even when it seemed to produce nothing, because you were building something that the student might not open for a long time. He had told Owen this once, when Owen was struggling in his first year of undergraduate study, not with the work, but with the feeling of the work, the sense that the effort was not showing results quickly enough. He had said, "You're building a structure. You can't see it while you're building it. You'll see it when it's done. You're building a structure. You can't see it while you're building it. You'll see it when it's done." Owen had looked at him with the expression young people sometimes wear when a parent says something that accidentally lands, surprised, a little resistant, as if they had not quite expected wisdom to arrive from that direction. "I'll remember that," Owen had said. Thomas thought about the structure Owen had built since then. 4 years of undergraduate study in biology, a master's thesis on migratory fish populations in coastal estuaries. Thomas devoted Minborn estuaries and histories of estuaries, a doctoral position at a university in Edinburgh that had offered him a funded place and a supervisor whose work Owen had been reading since he was 19. The structure was considerable. It was also, somehow, still his 9-year-old, who had needed a reason to get out of bed and look at salamanders in the rain. They heard the river before they saw it. This is always the way with rivers, especially after rain, when they are running high and with purpose. The sound came up through the trees from below, a low, broad, rushing sound. Not the quick chatter of the small creek at camp, but something fuller and more sustained, a sound with weight to it, with the sense of a great deal of water moving with great confidence in a particular direction. The sound must have been one. The sound in the water must be free. Thomas heard it and felt something respond in his chest, some old, unlearned recognition of what that sound meant. Water, larger than himself, going somewhere without him. The trail descended more steeply in the last half mile before the river, switchbacking down through a rhododendron thicket that arched over the trail like a green tunnel, the branches meeting overhead, so that for several minutes they walked in a dim and dripping world of their own, entirely enclosed. Throughout my life, I have learned that the most profound wisdom often comes from the quietest moment. The rhododendron leaves were enormous, 6, 8, 10 inches long, waxy and dark, holding their rain and bright drops that fell with startling cold when a branch was disturbed. Thomas moved through the tunnel with his head slightly bowed, partly from the low branches and partly, he recognized, from the feeling of moving through something ceremonial. That was what it felt like. Not a rhododendron thicket, exactly. More like a passage, the approach to something. And then the thicket ended, and the trail leveled, and through the trees he saw it. A brown flicker at first, glimpsed between trunks. And then, as he came closer and the trees thinned, the full sweep of it, the Toccoa River, high with rain and running fast, tawny brown from the upstream soil it had picked up, wide and powerful and alive in the way that only moving water is alive, with a constant renewal, every second different from the second before. Eli had stopped at the bank and was looking upriver. Owen was ahead of them both, already at the base of the bridge, looking up. The bridge was remarkable. Thomas had known it was coming. Owen's briefing at breakfast had covered the basics, but there is a difference between knowing a thing and seeing it. The bridge emerged from the near bank on two steel cables, thick as a man's wrist, anchored to stone towers on either end, and swayed out over the gorge in a long, graceful curve, the wooden decking suspended below the cables on vertical hangers. The whole structure narrow enough that two people walking abreast would be a tight fit, and long enough that the far end, 270 feet away, was slightly dimmed by the rain. It swayed, not violently, not alarmingly, but perceptibly, in the wind that came up through the gorge, a slow, lateral movement, barely an inch at the center. The kind of movement that is enough to remind you, at a level below thought, that you are suspended above open air. Beautiful, said Owen. He said it with the reverence he reserved for things that earned it, not used casually, not deployed to fill the space where a response was expected, but the actual word for the actual feeling, arrived at without detour. It is, said Thomas. They stood at the near end of the bridge for a while, the three of them, looking at it, and at the river below. The river was running perhaps 60 feet below the bridge deck, Thomas estimated, well short of the full 110 feet Owen had mentioned, because the river was running high after recent rain and had climbed its banks considerably. In normal conditions, the drop would be greater still. It is a perfect square. Even now, looking down through the cable railings at the brown water moving fast and purposefully below. The height was more than sufficient to register somewhere in the body, some vestigial caution, a reminder that this was not ground. Should we go? Eli asked. One at a time or together? Owen asked. Eli looked at the bridge. It's rated for several hundred pounds. We can go together. The rated capacity and the optimal experience may be different things, Owen said. We'll go together, Thomas said. He stepped onto the bridge first. He was not sure why, not asserting anything, not making a statement about age or precedence. It was more that someone needed to go first, and he was closest, and the bridge was there. I said I would be deeply sure how much the bridge discovered. His boots found the wooden decking, wet and slightly rough under the treads, and the bridge moved, a small, responding shift, barely perceptible, just enough to register. He took 3 steps out and stopped and looked down through the cable railing at the river, which was magnificent from here, wider than it had seemed from the bank, filling the gorge fully. The brown water smoothed in the center of the channel and turned to white at the boulders near each bank. He heard his sons come up behind him. The bridge moved more with 3 people on it, nothing dramatic, just a gentle oscillation, a slow breathing, the cables humming very faintly in the wind that came up the gorge. Thomas began walking, and they walked together, slowly, the bridge shifting with each step, the river appearing and disappearing below them, as the bridge described its gentle arc. Halfway across, Thomas stopped, He was not sure why, quite. He just stopped. He stood at the center of the bridge, above the center of the river, and looked downstream. The Toccoa River curved to the right below them and disappeared behind a stand of hemlocks, the trees dark and close on both banks, their lower trunks wet and dark. The rain was still falling, lighter now, nearly a mist, and on the surface of the river it made a pattern of tiny rings, thousands of them, each one arriving and disappearing instantly, the whole surface in a state of constant small revision. Owen came up beside him. He looked downstream too. Toccoa is a Cherokee word, Owen said, after a moment. It means beautiful. Thomas looked at the river. He looked at the rings the rain made on it, arriving and disappearing. He looked at the hemlocks. They named it right, he said. On the far bank, they stopped and ate their mid-morning snack under the partial shelter of a large hemlock, sitting on a fallen log, looking back at the bridge from the northern side. From here, it looked even more like a thing imagined, a slender thread across a gap, improbably sturdy, connecting one bank to the other. Thomas thought about the fact that it had been built in 1977, the year he turned 4 years old. It had been swaying over this river, in rain and sun and ice and wind, through the long decades of its life, while he had been living his life entirely elsewhere, entirely unaware of it. He thought, how many things are there like this? How many beautiful and specific things are there in the world that I have not yet encountered, that have been there all along, going about their business, waiting without waiting? He was not sure whether this thought made him happy or sad. He thought it might make him both, which seemed, increasingly, like the honest condition of being alive. Not either or but, both and. The happiness and the sadness present simultaneously, not fighting each other but coexisting, like the rain and the beauty of the rain. Dad, said Eli. He looked at his younger son. Eli was looking at him with an expression Thomas recognized, but could not always predict. A slightly careful look, the look Eli wore when he had something to say and was deciding how to say it, or whether to say it. What? Eli was quiet for a moment. He was looking at the bridge. Then he looked back at his father. I'm not going overseas, he said. Thomas waited. I am. The program. I'm still enrolled, but I deferred. He paused. I deferred a year. I applied for the deferral in March, and they approved it, and I've been trying to figure out how to tell you. I don't know why it was hard to tell you. He looked at the bridge again. I have a job, starting in September, an environmental consulting firm in Charlottesville. I'll be an hour from home. Thomas sat with this. He looked at his son. Eli was 22, and sitting here on this log on the far bank of the Toccoa River in the rain, he looked, for a moment, very young, not the efficient, composed young man who had made the coffee and checked the weather and set up the rain tarp, but someone younger than that, someone waiting to be told that it was all right. An hour from home, Thomas said, Yeah, Charlottesville, yeah. I know it's not. Eli stopped. He started again. I know you said you were proud of the Edinburgh program. I know you thought that was the right thing. I thought it was the right thing for you, Thomas said. Not for me. Eli looked at him. I'll be honest, Thomas said, and he chose his words carefully, the way he always tried to choose words when they mattered. My first feeling, hearing that, is relief, which may be selfish. You tell me if it's selfish. He paused. But my second feeling is that you know what you need better than I do. You always have. You're the one who checks the weather. You're the one who sets up the tarp before the rain comes. He looked at his son. I trust your forecasting. Eli was quiet for a long moment. The river moved below the bridge, brown and constant. I wasn't sure you'd see it that way, Eli said. I'm not always predictable. You're usually predictable. Then this is a good day. Owen had been sitting slightly apart, giving them room, which was something Owen was good at despite his general orientation toward filling spaces with information. He knew, with people he loved, when the space needed to remain space. But now, he said, without looking at either of them, I've known since April. I know you have, Eli said. I told him not to say anything to you, Eli said, looking at his father. I wanted to tell you myself. I just kept not finding the right time. This is the right time, Thomas said. In the rain, on a log, after a suspension bridge. I can't think of a better one. Owen finally looked at them. His expression was the particular Owen expression that meant he was pleased without wanting to show how pleased he was. A slight compression of the mouth, a quality of satisfaction carefully managed. He had been carrying this secret for 2 months. Thomas thought about what that must have been like for Owen, who processed everything through language, who told you what he was reading, and what he was thinking, and what the salamander was called, and what the bridge was rated for. To have held something unspoken for 2 months, because his brother had asked him to. He looked at Owen. Thank you, he said, for waiting. Owen nodded, once. He needed to tell you, he said simply. They walked another 6 miles that afternoon, as the rain slowly made good on Eli's forecast, and thinned, and then gentled, and then stopped. In the way rain sometimes stops, not dramatically, not with any announcement, but with a gradual trailing off, a final few drops, and then the drip from the leaves for a while, and then the forest simply being wet, rather than being rained upon, which is a different thing, a quieter thing, a thing with more stillness in it. Thomas walked and thought about what Eli had told him. He had meant what he said on the log. The relief was real, and he was not ashamed of it. One son going to Scotland was enough of a departure to reckon with. 2 sons leaving the continent simultaneously had been a prospect he had faced with what he hoped was grace, and what he suspected was a kind of deliberate not looking, the way you don't look directly at something bright. The news that Eli would be an hour away next fall, a drive through the mountains, a Sunday dinner that was possible rather than impossible. He let himself feel the relief of that fully. Let it settle into him, the way good news needs time to settle, to become real. But he also thought, walking, about what it meant, that Eli had been carrying this since March, had folded it up and put it away, and not told him, had waited for the trail, for the bridge, for the right moment, which was also to say, had waited until he was sure, had spent months making sure. This was Eli. This was the precision of him, the care with which he approached decisions, the way he never rushed toward a thing until he had considered it from every angle, accounted for the weather, packed the tarp. Thomas thought about the thing Eli had said. I wasn't sure you'd see it that way. He had turned this over for most of the afternoons walking. It was not a rebuke. Eli was not given to rebukes. But it was information. And Thomas was a teacher. And teachers pay attention to information. His son, at 22, had not been sure that his father could be told a piece of news without its being complicated. Had not been sure, despite everything, despite the years of trying, that Thomas's first response would be trust rather than concern. He thought, I have more to show him. I have more to be. He thought, 21 more days. No, 20 days now. 20 days to show him. The trail moved through a stretch of open forest here, the trees farther apart and the understory thinner, and the late afternoon light, emerging for the first time all day, came through at a low angle, the way it does after rain when it returns. Tentative at first, almost apologetic, and then committing, spreading across the forest floor in long, warm sheets, lighting the wet leaves so that every surface briefly held its own small fire. Thomas stopped. He stood in the light. He felt it on his face, the first sun of the day, warm and specific, like a hand. He stood there for a while, simply standing, simply being where he was. They made camp at Gooch Mountain Shelter, arriving in the late afternoon, with the sun still an hour from the ridge. The shelter was a long three-sided structure, set back from the trail in a flat clearing, with a picnic table and a bare box and a water source 50 yards down a blue blaze side trail. A small spring, cold and clear, where Thomas filled all three of their bottles and stood for a moment listening to the spring make its sound, which was different from the creek sound and different from the river sound, quieter and more private. The sound of water that has just arrived from somewhere underground and has not yet decided what to be. A group of 4 college students was already at the shelter when they arrived, cheerful and loud in the way of young people on their first night out, their gear conspicuously new, their conversation ranging from the practical to the philosophical, in the rapid cycles of people who have not yet slowed down. They greeted Thomas and his sons with enthusiasm and asked the usual questions: how far, where from, how long, and Owen answered all of them with a thoroughness that made the students look at each other with expressions of pleasant surprise. After dinner, a freeze-dried pasta dish that Thomas considered, privately, a significant improvement over last night's chicken and rice, they sat outside in the cooling evening air while the students at the shelter talked and laughed, their voices carrying without effort the young noise of it. Owen was writing in a small notebook. He played by a settlement in the glade of the black moon. This was a habit Thomas had not known about, and he watched it with quiet interest. Owen's head bent over the page, his handwriting small and quick, the pen moving steadily. Owen looked up and found his father watching and did not seem embarrassed. I've been keeping a field journal, Owen said, since undergrad, everywhere I go. He looked at the notebook. I write down what I see: the salamander, the bridge, the species, the conditions, sometimes other things, thoughts, conversations. He looked at Thomas. Things worth keeping. Thomas thought about this. He thought about his own father, who had not kept a journal, who had not been a writer, whose compressed wisdom lived now only in Thomas's memory, imperfect and partial, less complete with every year. He thought about what it would be worth to have his father's voice written down, a few sentences here and there, a record of the way he thought about things. That's a good habit, Thomas said. I picked it up from a professor, Owen said. She said the only way to really see something is to describe it. The act of describing forces you to look. He paused. I think she was right. The evening came on. The students went to their sleeping bags early. Their enthusiasm converted at last into tiredness, which is what enthusiasm always becomes eventually, and which is also something to be grateful for. The clearing was quiet. A barred owl began somewhere in the trees to the south. Not the great horned owl of the night before. A different voice, higher and more conversational, asking its different question. Who cooks for you? Who cooks for you all? A call that had always, to Thomas, sounded more like a joke than a question. Some old avian running commentary on the domestic arrangements of the world. Eli had gone to the bear box. The shelter provided one. A welcome change from last night's hanging of the food bag in the trees. To stow their food, and came back and sat down and looked up at the sky, which was clear now. Fully clear for the first time, the rain having scrubbed it of every particle, so that the dark above them was deeply dark, and the stars were extraordinary, the Milky Way fully visible, a great smear of pale light across the sky's center. Charlottesville, Thomas said. Eli looked at him. We should have dinner, when you're settled in. Yeah, Eli said. Yeah, we should. Not a thing I'm asking you to plan, Thomas said. I'll drive down. I'll take you somewhere good. Eli smiled. It was his small, real smile, the one that wasn't performed for anyone, that arrived without ceremony. Okay, he said. Owen looked up from his notebook. He appeared to be considering whether to say something. Then he did. I'll be in Scotland. You'll be in Scotland, Thomas agreed. I could potentially video call into the dinner. You could. It would be somewhat awkward. It would be very awkward, Eli said. I'll send a card, Owen said, with dignity, and returned to his notebook. Thomas looked at the stars. He found the Big Dipper, which he could always find, and Orion's belt, though Orion was barely visible at this time of year, low on the horizon, about to disappear for the summer. He thought about his boys, one going to Scotland, one staying home, both of them his, both of them already, in ways he was only beginning to understand, their own. He thought, I have been so afraid of their leaving that I have not quite let myself see that they are, simply, people, not just sons, people. Owen with his notebook and his catalogued world, his salamanders and his facts and the careful love he showed by keeping secrets for his brother. Ellie with his tarp set up before the rain, his forecasting, his year deferred, his choice made privately and deliberately, in the full confidence that he knew what he needed. They had arrived good. He was lucky. But they had also arrived themselves, fully, particularly themselves. And that was not luck. Or not only luck. That was their own work, done without his seeing most of it, done in all the time he had not been watching. He was watching now. He thought, 20 days left. He thought, pay attention. He slept well again, better than the night before, his body beginning its accommodation, the hard ground becoming simply the ground, neither comfortable nor uncomfortable, simply present, simply where he was. He woke once in the night to hear rain beginning again on the shelter's roof, a soft, pattering sound, gentle and without drama. He lay in his sleeping bag and listened to it and thought about the river. He thought about Eli's news. He turned it over, quietly, in the dark. He felt again the relief and let himself feel it without shame. He felt also something else, a kind of tenderness toward the version of his son who had spent 4 months deciding whether to tell him, who had waited for the right moment, which turned out to be a suspension bridge in the rain. He thought, I should have made it easier for him to tell me. He thought, I will make it easier. Going forward, I will make it easier. The rain continued on the roof. The barred owl had gone quiet. Somewhere in the forest an animal moved, small, unhurried, the brief sound of a dry leaf under something's foot, and then silence again. He closed his eyes. The river was still there, somewhere south of them, moving in the dark, making its sound to no one, tawny and full and beautiful, its name meaning exactly what it was. End of story 2. The trail continues north. In 3 more days, the weather will clear fully, and they will climb Blood Mountain, the highest point on the Georgia Appalachian Trail, at 4,461 feet. In conditions so clear that they will see, from the summit, a view that will stop all 3 of them cold and silent. Owen will attempt to describe it and find, for once, that description falls short. Thomas will earn his trail name. Eli will say something that Thomas will write down that evening on a piece of paper and carry in his shirt pocket for the rest of the trip. That is not this story. Tonight it is enough to hear the rain on the roof and to know that his sons are nearby, asleep, and that tomorrow the trail goes on. Next in the series, Story 3, Blood Mountain, in which the sky clears, the summit arrives, and something is named.